Hello, good morning. Get set up here. Hi, good morning. I'm Lorraine Jacobs, and Mark Miller, who is our Zoom host, and I are co-chairs of the Sunday Forum group. And we welcome you. Thanks for supporting the forum. I'm going to read the forum story, and then we'll move on from there. Sunday forums have been part of Sunday morning for over 50 years at First Unitarian Society, Milwaukee. All scheduling and hosting is accomplished by volunteers. The forums support our mission. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, inspire action. The lecture series showcases provocative and sometimes controversial speakers who review topical issues of the day. Content is the responsibility of the presenters who share their point of view as formed through their experience and knowledge. Every forum is not intended to express all sides of the topics nor all points of view. Presenters do not receive honoraria. Forum topics may not always align with the viewpoint of the First Unitarian Society Milwaukee, and they are meant to introduce thoughtful topics which our members are encouraged to pursue in the future. I just want to bring to your attention next Sunday, October 17th, our forum presenter will be Trent Miller, and he's speaking on socially responsible investing. And yes, he is a member of First Church. He's the head of the social investment team. The host that Sunday will be Bruce Wiggins. And right now, I welcome our speaker today, and Dan O'Keefe, who is the host, and he'll do the introductions. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dan O'Keefe. I'm a member of the First Unitarian Forum Committee, as Lorraine pointed out. I have the privilege this morning to introduce today's topic and speaker. Milwaukee is located on the traditional lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux peoples. In 2007, after much research and discussion, the United Nations issued a Declaration of the Human Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This 30-page document articulates basic human rights which offer a way for states and indigenous peoples to coexist. However, it's fair to say most of us don't know what this is or how effective and how it's carried out. Today, Mr. Tony Gonzalez, member of the Seri Chicano peoples, will share his intimate knowledge of its development. He was a member of the United Nations Commission and the United Nations Working Group on Indigenous Rights. As a longtime leader within AIM, the American Indian movement, he is very knowledgeable. He also gives many talks and hosts a radio program on the West Coast, as well as other projects, including television. Let's welcome Tony Gonzalez.
Oh, thank you very much. And good morning, my relatives. I extend my hand in friendship. And also, to all peoples, we celebrate tomorrow Indigenous Peoples Day, which itself it has been a struggle to declare that and to move away from colonial thinking and
good morning.
They discovered America.
The host for
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So Indigenous Peoples Day in the United States, there are quite a few states that have now declared Indigenous Peoples Day. And President Biden just the other day has acknowledged and declared Indigenous Peoples Day itself. And it's the first time a president has ever done that, acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day as opposed to Columbus, for October 12. So that's a good step forward, and perhaps in the near future, there'll be federal legislation that will officially declare the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day. And that'll be a good thing, because all of this is to make people aware of the culture and the lives of Indigenous peoples, and how we can work together mutually and amicably for a sustainable earth living, and that for the coming generations. And so with that, I also want to say that tomorrow, many of us here in the San Francisco Bay Area will be going to Alcatraz Island, as we have been for the past 30, 35 years now. And this will be to mark 529 years of Indigenous peoples' resistance to colonization in the Western Hemisphere, 1492, 2021. And with that, we link up with Indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. In Mexico, Central America, South America, that day has always been referred to as Dia de la Raza, the Day of the People. And raza meaning Indigenous peoples, or raza, peoples, gente. Some people think that that's very narrow, but Dia de la Raza means the Indigenous peoples of the hemisphere. So I think we're stepping in line with Indians throughout the hemisphere, and indeed the world, now that we've all come full circle in knowing who we are and what the challenges are ahead. So I also want to give thanks to Pam Richards, who I've known since, I don't know, it must be the last century, 1980s, 90s. And Pam Richards served with the International Indian Treaty Council as a volunteer for over a decade or so, providing the help in the office and just getting work done in general. So I want to thank Pam. We've had a long friendship over the years, and we're staying together. And I can see that she's active and working well. So, I'm very happy to know that. Also, I see we may also, well, I said that, let's see. I'll try to cover or explain the following in grassroots terms, my relatives. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a grassroots, and many of you have seen my resume, which includes my service in the military. I was drafted shortly after high school, and I was in Vietnam in 1968 and 69. I was wounded several times, and I'm disabled, which is what now helps me, having been compensated by the military, allows me to be more mobile and continue to do the work I'm doing with what I receive monthly with my disability. Today, I'll try to cover and explain the following, as I said, and with my vast experience, hands-on experience, that is, in the halls of the United Nations. First will be a little background that led up to the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Also, what achievements since the adoption of the Declaration in 2007, which for you to mark, it's been 14 years. September of 2007 to the present time period, 14 years now, that it was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. And third and last would be the youth challenges ahead. This is the future opportunities and also the upgrade of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to a convention. This is a hardly talked about topic, but we'll get into that on the last phase of my talk. Well, Indigenous peoples have been struggling, as you know, for several hundred years, and not having a voice in the onslaught of the invading colonial settlers in different parts of the world. And we can go fast forward to the League of Nations at the turn of the 20th century, when Chief Destaque of the Cayuga Nation, which is a part of the Iroquois Sixth Confederacy, went to Geneva, Switzerland, and tried to address the League of Nations. And Chief Destaque went with his wampum, which delineated certain agreements on how the Iroquois conduct their business. Chief Destaque went there in 1923 to talk about the same issues that we're talking about today, which is treaty rights, which is the environment and Mother Earth, and securing the generations to come. And with those pillars, Chief Destaque laid a groundwork and direction for Indigenous peoples to pursue. So indeed, he is an inspiration. And 2023 will mark 100 years that Chief Destaque came to the League of Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. So that's a very historic, very significant milestone, if you will, in the struggle for the rights and dignity, self-respect, and self-determination of peoples of the world. Having said that, the United Nations, first of all, when it was becoming mature in its politics, 1945, and with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which was signed, by the way, here in San Francisco. At that time, 1945, 1948, there were only 55 countries within the United Nations. And today you have well over 195 countries today bound together in the charter of the United Nations. So in itself, it's evolved and come a long ways. But I can assure you, when Eleanor Roosevelt, who chaired that signing of the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Indian peoples, we're talking 1945, 1940s, Indian peoples was nowhere in the horizon of those discussions. And so it is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights speaks to the individual. Every individual has a right to blah. Every individual has a right to blah. Indigenous peoples operate on a collective basis. So collectivity was nowhere in those discussions at that time. In fact, racism, discrimination, indeed, genocide was an everyday happening in different parts of the world at that time. Indian peoples were being removed off their lands by the onslaught of colonial settlers. And the agenda of colonial settlers have always been the same: land and resources, and what that equals in terms of wealth, which is totally alien to indigenous peoples, whether black, white, red, or yellow Indians of the four directions of sacred Mother Earth. The land itself was never perceived as a property or as a basis to generate revenue or wealth. So this was a total clash of cultures, if you will, with the indigenous peoples being the victims. In the Americas, when we talk about the Second World War and how many people were killed and died and exterminated, for example, during the Holocaust of the Jewish people, we hardly talk about the extermination and the genocide that was being inflicted on Indians of the Americas. I'm trying to, there's a screen, I can't remember. Are you seeing me, or are you seeing there's something covering my face there?
We see you. We
Is
see
it
you.
being covered?
No.
Okay, I'm on my wife's computer and I don't know how to use her computer.
I see you.
Okay, well, I'll just ignore my face is covered. I don't know if I'm being watched, but Indian peoples have, of all directions, of all colors, we've been on the run since. This is why it's a good time to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, such as tomorrow. And now it's Indigenous peoples celebrate in unity, fast forward, as now the United Nations has declared August 9 as International Day of the world's Indigenous peoples. So we have two very significant historical dates of Indigenous people that binds us and keeps us in solidarity and moving forward together. And that is one, Indigenous Peoples Day, or otherwise known as Dia de la Raza here in this hemisphere, Western Hemisphere, and internationally, International Day of the world's Indigenous peoples. And so I'm trying to keep a chronology of the process and events that have led up to where we are today and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so with during the 40s, after the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the 50s, the movement for Indigenous peoples was afoot in different areas, including here in North America. Indian people were beginning to stand up and organize in defense of their rights, knowing that they were losing a lot of land and resources. Virtually every treaty that the United States Congress has adopted and ratified with Indian peoples have been violated. We're talking about over 370 treaties. And with these violations of the treaties goes to the heart of the violations that this country has violated within the United States Constitution itself. The United States Constitution in Article 6 refers to treaties as the supreme law of the land. Treaties are the supreme law of the land, and they have virtually all been violated. So how and where would we, as oppressed and subjugated to colonial power and force, seek justice? What court? This is a mindset. We have to go back, as I'm talking to the 40s and 50s and 60s, which I'm 73 years old. I don't know how old some of you are, but I can relate to those time periods and the type of life Indigenous peoples have led, including myself as a Chicano. What we were all subjected to, and through the 50s and into the 60s, which brings me up to the formation of the American Indian Movement, July 1968 in Minneapolis in Minnesota. Unofficially, the American Indian Movement began in 1492, when the first Indio was killed in the islands of Hispaniola, or now referred to as San Salvador, those islands in the Caribbean, with the coming of Christopher Colon, etc. When they first killed that Indian person, that Taino perhaps, that began the American Indian Movement to reclaim our destiny and our rights to live among the many nations in solidarity. And so in the 60s, with the formation of American Indian Movement, I mean, even leading up to the creation of the AIM, Indian people were already being forcibly relocated from their traditional homelands. This was the final phase and stage of forcible relocation. When we talk about the James Polk, the president in 1820s, and the Trail of Tears, forcibly relocating people away from their lands and putting all the Indians of the East Coast into Oklahoma, which, by the way, is a Choctaw name itself. Oklahoma means land of the red man. And they were all being deposited there.
Tony, can I ask a question at this point? I got a real nice.
We're crossing across into Q&A, but go ahead, Mark.
Sure. I'll just mention I like the connection of 19.
Oh, is Daniel?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I like the connection of 1923 when the Cayuga chief went to Geneva.
Just
Yeah, and in 1945 was the international human rights. In 2007 was the Indigenous people's rights. Can you talk about the ways that those the declaration is being carried out? I understand there is a permanent forum on Indigenous rights at the UN, and there's also the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous people, and there's also a special rapporteur at the UN that helps carry out these ideas that the declaration outlines.
Yeah.
And also, one last thing, in the last 14 years, what have been the successes of this declaration?
Well, Dan, you pretty much said my whole discourse, the rest of my discourse, of how I was going to lead into that. I want to lay the foundation of what led up to the declaration.
Sure. Sorry.
Why did that happen?
Sure.
It was through all of the devastation that we've been subjected to for over the years. and the American Indian movement that brought this ultimately to the attention of the government, saying that we're not going to take this anymore. And it had to take an armed struggle at Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1973, after many peoples were being killed off at that time in that particular region by goons or goon squads of the Oglala Pine Ridge Reservation, led by the chairman at that time, that part of the country was operating much like third world country, as during the 60s and 70s and 80s that we witnessed the dictatorship of governments in Central America, whether Guatemala, El Salvador, and even now with Honduras and Nicaragua. Those were all being operated by dictators. And that's how the chairman Wilson was operating the Pine Ridge Reservation, which led to Wounded Knee armed struggle. And so the American Indian movement after 73 and even the aftermath of Wounded Knee from 73 to 75, it's the period that we refer to as the Reign of Terror. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, over 65 men and women were killed in various ways, died, assassinated, disappeared, and the United States Department of Justice has not investigated any of those, has come up with any positive investigation for any of those deaths. And so all of this culmination led to the American Indian movement also organizing the first international conference in South Dakota on the Sisseton Reservation. 1974, the American Indian movement helped organize the International Indian Treaty Council, which that organization, the International Indian Treaty Council, acquired non-governmental status in the Economic and Social Council at the UN in 1977. It was the very first indigenous organization to acquire such a status in the UN. So this is what Chief Destaque, 1923, had wanted, a place at the table. And 1977, that was achieved in part by the American Indian movement, having created the forum to establish the International Indian Treaty Council. And so with that, moving forward, within the United Nations, a special rapporteur was designated by the UN to initiate a global study on Indian peoples, and that was given to Jose Martinez Cobo, now referred to the recommendations by the special rapporteur Cobo are now referred to as the Cobo Report, C-O-B-O, Cobo Report. He was from Ecuador. 1972, he began for the United Nations a mandate to study Indian populations. And the culmination of that report, the Cobo Report, Jose Martinez Cobo Report, 1986, 85, 86, also with that voluminous study included a recommendation that there be, now we're talking about the 70s when he started writing that, and the recommendations in the 80s, he declared that there should be a declaration on the rights of Indian people. We're talking 1985, and fast forward, it was adopted by the General Assembly, as I said, in 2007. But Cobo Report was already setting a direction and a course through, by virtue of that study, a pathway for Indian peoples to work its way through the United Nations to achieve a place at the table, because a part of that recommendation of 85, 86 by Cobo was that there eventually be a convention on the rights of the world's indigenous peoples. We're not there yet. We're still right now talking about what led up to the declaration, what achievements have the UN done, and as I said in my last part that I would talk would be the challenges ahead for the young people, and that is to push forward for a convention on the rights of indigenous peoples. Well, what's the difference between a convention and a declaration, right? Well, first of all, let's understand that there's a procedure to achieve a convention. I mean, let's say, for example, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Children have a convention on their rights. Indian peoples, we do not have a convention on the rights of the world's indigenous peoples. Why is that? There's still problems with governments grappling with the rights and self-determination of Indian people. They realize today they have to make room for us. So there's a lot of resistance. But let me back up to how do you achieve a convention? Within the United Nations, there's what's called United Nations democratic procedure toward a convention. So to become a convention, first of all, you start out as a proclamation, which we have, the Proclamation on the Rights of Indian People. We had that back in the 90s. And then the establishment of a working group. And then from a working group onto the Declaration on the Rights of Indian, a declaration from a working group to a declaration, whichever body and topic they may be pursuing process for a convention. And after the working group is that declaration. And after the declaration, such as the rights of the child was a declaration back in 1979, it was a declaration. That's where the Declaration on the Rights of Indian Peoples are today, a declaration. And so now the next step, like for the rights of the child, was the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So democratic procedure within the UN, Indian peoples have a right to achieve that convention level. And by convention, that means that these laws that the government sign on to are enforceable by the United Nations. It becomes very difficult, perhaps, to have countries ratify a convention because they know what they're getting into. But that's the challenges ahead for Indian peoples of the world, is to achieve that convention, to make it enforceable. Whereas today, there's a lot of transparency and solidarity with the declaration. It's not officially enforceable, those 46 articles, but they are of international understanding, and as strong as reference to, for example, like Joe's Kogan's, or that is internationally recognized, and see those standards as enforceable by implication of other United Nations standards that make the declaration viable in common with international law. So on that basis, it is enforceable. So that's one of the challenges we have today with fast forward with the Declaration on the Rights of Indian People is we need case law in all continents of the world. Indian people have to be forthright and determined to whatever violations are occurring in those countries, in those areas. They need to assert, they need to find the lawyers that also assert the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indian People. So we need to build that case law to make references. Even today here in North America, with our struggles against the extractive industries, oil and gas, and what we witnessed as Standing Rock in 2016 to hold up the Dakota Access Pipeline. And today we have Line 3 up there in Minneapolis area coming through. All of these need to be cited to include certain articles of the Declaration in those court cases. So that's where we are at this point, and that is to build case law to make the Declaration known, because even here in the United States, the court systems that hardly recognizes or makes reference to international laws and standards. So we have to educate the justices, the different courts, about the Declaration on the Rights of Indian People and how to utilize it to make it enforceable. Now, when that was adopted, the Declaration was adopted by the General Assembly in 2007. As you know, 4 countries of the world did not sign that declaration: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. 4 countries did not sign. Those 4 countries have treaties. I talked to you about the importance, significance of treaties here in the United States and the Constitution, but internationally, treaties are recognized as international law itself. And all those 4 countries, including the United States, did not want to commit to Indian people and rights. The United States was the last holdout of the 4 countries, because eventually they started signing on. New Zealand, then Australia, then Canada, the United States. President Obama adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indian People in 2010. Took 3 years. And that was in December. And so now that gives you an idea of the attitude that we're faced with, even as a declaration, let alone the idea of a convention in the near future. But that is our course in our direction, and for the people, the young people, to follow. I'll leave it right there. I know you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're all busting with questions.
Well,
time
we hope so. And there's so much information that you have stored in your head. I'm 73 as well, and I don't know how you managed to store all that up there. That's really great. Thank you. I think it's because of your involvement. We have, there was a question on the chat, and you had answered that. So that was great. And I want to let people know that there is time now. If you have a question, you can raise your little yellow hand and I'll see it in your picture, or you can write something in the chat. And just so you know, I copied and I'll send the information about your television program to our 2 largest Google groups at church who would be interested in that, and try to pass the word that way, because the chat just ends at the end of the program. So I just wanted to ask, and this is not a large global issue, but it's something I notice here in Wisconsin, is that the treaty rights of our Native people are constantly challenged. In particular, right now, we're looking at hunting and management of the wildlife and natural areas. And I wonder if you have any observations or comments about that.
Yes, no, I'm not familiar, with the trees there in Wisconsin, but
Right.
Food subsistence and food sovereignty, food sufficiency, these are all topics today, and certainly the hunt for our different foods, whether it's fish or deer, elk, or other animals to sustain ourselves, has always been a part of our agenda. And of course, the government has a lot of regulations for hunting now, and it's better to go to 7-Eleven or some fast food place. But no, that will continue to be a part of Indigenous people's rights, and to hunt and fish and to sustain themselves.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see a question from Juliet. Juliet, would you are unmuted, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. It's very helpful as a beginning way of thinking about all that you've been dealing with, and your people, who are our people too, as you know. We feel very connected with all of you. I'm glad you told me about Indigenous Peoples Day for tomorrow, because we have a poetry group in our church, and we will be getting together tomorrow morning. And I have a poem about, it's called The Spirit of the Great Lakes. And it's about how we've just taken what we want. And the Spirit of the Great Lakes is asking in the poem, are you happy now? Have you got what you wanted from the land? It's rather bitter, but it's really in the same kind of frame that you are talking about. So I will be reading that tomorrow in my poetry group, because to celebrate this day and to, I don't know if celebrate is the right word, but to acknowledge that it's Indigenous Peoples Day. We're all indigenous to something. And I'm very proud that we can join with you in understanding more about the things that you're dealing with all the time and that consume your life. And thank you so much for giving your life to this work.
Thank you, Juliet. And yes, indeed, we're all Indigenous peoples, but many people have lost that, or lost their way, if you will. And that's what today's Indigenous people serve, is to help remind you of who you are. A lot of so-called like non-Indian people who want to know about Indigenous, they also want an Indian name. There's a lot of Indians that don't even have their own Indian name, and you have a lot of non-Indians that want an Indian name, and it goes too far. We're only here to remind you who you are, to dig deep into your ancestors, and to begin to learn and walk in balance. If you can reach out to the 7 ancestors of the past, that's deep, and you begin to walk in balance, you begin to understand them, you begin to learn the natural world and how we are all related and need to balance ourselves out. This is what our statesman Oren Lyons on the East Coast of the Haudenosaunee says, that we have a very little time to Indianize 4 billion people in the world. We need to Indianize the world to get back in step and in harmony and protect it for the generations to come.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliet. There's a couple other questions, so we'll move along. Dan, you had a question?
Yeah, I want to mention that Tony is also featured on the American Indian Movement West website with the podcast, a radio show program that Tony sometimes hosts. Also want to mention that on Tuesday night here on Zoom, Chris Linder and I will be hosting a video and discussion about the Indian boarding schools and the response to the boarding schools Chris and I will be, more information can be obtained by contacting either Chris or I.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Good, yeah, thanks.
If you would email me that information about your discussion that's going on, I'll send that to the group too. And then also,
Send it to me too.
okay. And the AIM website is on chat and I copied that, so I'll send that out in the same email to people. So that's there. Thank you. Pam, you had a comment or question.
Yeah, it's sort of a comic question. As I've been at a lot of different demonstrations over time, and what's so important to Native people is the connection to place. Like, people can't just leave and go somewhere else and be the entities that they are, be their Native American selves. And it's got to do with sacred sites, but it's also just got to do with the love of the land where their ancestors are and just how important this is. And I wonder if Tony could talk a little bit about sacred sites.
No, thank you, Pam. Sacred sites is foremost in our struggle for self-determination, a place to prayer, and sacred sites is a part of the culture. As we talk about human rights and even the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, our cultural and spiritual beliefs merge together to make that self-determination. And included with that cultural beliefs includes that sector of sacred sites, a place where we pray and where we identify that would be a part of our culture. And also the language is intricately involved in that merging consciousness with spiritual sites. And many of these spiritual sites are under attack today. Many areas are being plundered. We have grave diggers, grave thieves virtually have a business of looking for grave sites and sacred sites and looking for indigenous items. Sometimes we see that some are found, and sometimes we hear that there's auctions going on in Paris. Sacred items, which came from a sacred place. So we need to protect all of these. And as Juliet made reference to water and for tomorrow's ceremony, I also wanted to include the rivers. Rivers are sacred. And now we're becoming more and more consciously aware that rivers have a memory, if you will. That's how deep the understanding and the commonality that goes with identifying land, culture, and spirituality.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
the
you.
rights of nature. And I know the Yurok people have declared their river having rights, the rights of nature for the rivers.
We have 3 more indications of questions and about 5 or 6 more minutes or so.
I'll try to be short.
We're not in a terrible, but yeah. BJ, you're next. You had a question.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. I have learned so much from you, and I needed to, and I appreciate it. I wanted to ask, there have been those who tell us or tell we non-Indigenous people that we should not endeavor to practice any of the spiritual teachings of the Indigenous cultures. They see it as a co-opt of your beliefs, and they are such rich spiritual paths. I would like to know if there's a balance we can find with that for those of us who may be interested in learning more about them.
Well, thank you for that. And I'd like to qualify myself a little bit myself. And that is, as a Chicano, my people are from the Sonora Desert of Mexico, just south of Arizona. We are Kum Ka'ak. We have reclaimed our traditional name, Kum Ka'ak. Mexico and Spain refer to as Seri people, as I was introduced earlier, Seri Chicano. But we reclaimed our traditional name as Kum Ka'ak. And I grew up in foster homes, from when I was 7 years old, 18. And through those foster homes, I went through 8 foster homes, 8 different families. I like to say that I raised 8 families in my youth. And at 18, after high school, I got drafted into the military. I was in Vietnam. I didn't come back till 1970. So my life has been a revolving door. And I even divorced myself from Christianity. I was an altar boy. I used to serve mass. And I'm in Vietnam, and the priest goes out there and serves mass to us. And then he goes out there, okay, you guys go out there and do your job. I was in total contradiction in my life. Thou shalt not kill. Whatever happened to that? So after the second time I got wounded, I separated from the church, Jesus Christ, and Catholicism, and I was on my own. And I'm just a micro. There's a macro, millions of people like myself, Chicanos like myself, who didn't have any connection to reservation, didn't have any connection to indigenous peoples. So, it wasn't until I told you when I came upon the American Indian movement, 1980, then I began to understand more about who I am. So we're all learning. For non-Indians, if you will, to try to learn and then to take the leadership of spirituality and interpreting spiritual ways, that is not recommended at all.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take a back seat. If I'm in Europe, then I'm the leader to the European brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Europeans are over here. They are little brothers to us and shouldn't try to over on this knowledge and understanding and spirituality. It's a balancing act.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. Thank you. Joanne, you had a question? And then I think we're about done. I don't know, maybe we can.
Anthony, this is excellent timing. Our book club is meeting today, and it's going to be reading the book, An Indigenous People History of the United States by Roxanne Dubar Ortiz. Are you familiar with the book, and would you say anything about it? I was just floored by the information that it has in there. Are you familiar with this book?
Yes, and I'm familiar with the author, Dr. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Professor Emeritus from out here at the San Leandro College here on the East Bay of the Bay Area, San Francisco. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz was also among the first with indigenous peoples been in Geneva, Switzerland, 1977, and other gatherings there in Geneva since. So she has vast experience in reinterpreting the history in the United States, almost like a Howard Zinn book, but the flip side from Indian point of view. So it's much credit and well deserved to her consistency and determination. And her health is sometimes not good, but she keeps the standard high for even people like myself at 73, that we have to be as strong to continue with these stories.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bruce, did you have a question? I know you sent some information about UUA, and I'll try to get that out to people, but I don't want to leave you out of a question. Bruce, you're muted just in case you're trying to answer.
Yeah, I have to unmute.
Okay.
I just wanted to call people's attention to a principle called the doctrine of discovery that has been used to justify colonial activities and is still a legal principle cited most recently in 2005 by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. in
Uh,
a Supreme Court case. So unless people think we've progressed a lot, there's a whole lot of issues to think about and work on. And the UUA is working very hard on these racial justice issues. And I put in the chat a link to what the UUA is working to do on racial justice issues, including Native American rights. So take a look at some of those books. And as Joanne said, the book on Indigenous people's history is really eye-opening and very, very good.
I thank Bruce Wiggins for bringing that up. Certainly the doctrine of discovery is foremost now in people becoming aware that indeed that doctrine of discovery is kind of like the pink slip that colonial settlers use upon lands that they come to and claim it. And I dare say that I was disappointed with Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Ginsburg, because I really admire her and her intelligence and her perception and her vision of the future and you know, the loss of her passing. But she cited, Bruce, with reference to the Oneida case in that 2005 Supreme Court decision. It was in reference to the Oneida and to the taking of land. And I was very disappointed for her to come out with that. But certainly the doctrine of discovery, the cat's out of the bag and is picking up more and more steam. And countries, including the United States, is having to look at that doctrine. And how is it that it's so much alive when we're talking about truth and reconciliation, truth and justice and working with Indian people? That's what I'm saying. There's a lot of reluctance and hesitation by a lot of countries of how to look toward Indian people, but they see that there's an international movement of Indian peoples, and we're getting stronger. And we've cultivated a lot of our friends and relatives along the way. We have a lot of support because we're talking about sustainability and walking on Mother Earth in balance.
Thank you very much for coming, Tony. We appreciate your time and getting up at this ungodly hour on the West Coast. And we hope to meet the Giants here in Milwaukee very, very, very soon. And Megwitch, I think is the right term. Thank you so much.
And thank you, all my relations.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Tony.